Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go-around is Abbey Cook. She's a fashion trend forecaster by day, and in her free time, she's an angelic tap dancer. I was delighted to learn about how Abbey blends science and art to predict the future. She immerses herself in cultures all over the world to feel her way to the truth. I hope you enjoyed this chat with Abbey. Abbey Cook, thank you for joining me on the Why Am I podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is so nice to have the other half of the dynamic duo on board. So I am so pleased. So I always start these things out by saying you and I are waiting somewhere. And it is, I think, we are, where are we? We're somewhere, and we're sitting at the table and waiting on Lish to make her macadamia nut brittle so that she can make those amazing chocolate chip cookies. And we're sitting here conversating, and I tell you about who I am and what I do and all that stuff. And that runs dry really quick because I'm very boring. But now it's your turn to reciprocate. So Abbey, who are you?
Oh wow, that's a big question to just dive into. It's a big ask. Whoa. Whoa. You know, it's funny. I wrote a poem, like back in high school or junior high, and there was a line that had to be repeated. And my line was that I'm an angelic girl. I'm an angelic girl with tap shoes on. And tap was like my life growing up, and I just loved the rhythm aspect of it. So I don't know. Maybe there's my starting intro sentence. It's very vague. But
I'm an angelic girl with tap shoes. I dig it.
Yeah, exactly. But how deep do we go here on this question? I mean, I'm a Wisconsin native, but I've been in Brooklyn and New York for like 17 years. I'm a trend forecaster in fashion and color and design. But I don't know if that's if you really want to know who I am, I don't know. Like I said, I'm an old lady who likes to eat flowers. So give me those violet candies or those rose candies. Give me lavender ice cream.
So you said a lot of different things there. But to me, one of the peak things I picked out was you are a trend forecaster. And so I'm assuming most people listening to this have no concept of what a trend forecaster is. So what exactly does that mean?
It's a good question because I didn't know what it was either, and I had no idea.
You just
Googled
this was
it
10 minutes ago, just
yeah,
to make sure.
Exactly. It's like, what do I do? What is this job? I mean, short story is I predict fashion trends 2 years in advance, and with today's society, maybe it's more like a year out to a year and a half because things are moving a little faster. But I work on color and textiles, and a lot of it's really looking at cultural aspects of the world to determine. Like I actually look at fashion last. But short story is, yes, I'm predicting things 2 years in advance.
That's interesting. There's so many questions. So colors and textiles. So you lead with, what do you lead with first, do you think? A color or a textile?
Well, I honestly lead with cultural information first, like what's happening in the world and where, what does that then mean for clothes? So even right now is just a great example because with the pandemic, I think, everybody we're locked inside. It was just it still is, kind of a hard time. And I think that's why, for example, with color, it's been so bright and cheery because I think everybody just wants to have fun. And so, we'll look at those kind of indicators. And this is an easy one because it's such a big thing happening. But, between the recession and the pandemic, it wasn't quite so roller coaster-ish. It was a bit more even. So, I worked in corporate for many years, over a decade, and I worked with a team from 5 to 8 people, and we traveled around the world. So I got to go everywhere from Cape Town to Wellington in New Zealand to Reykjavik in Iceland, Tokyo, everywhere. And as I always say, I'm basically a cultural sponge, and I'm just absorbing all this information all the time. It's almost kind of like having a sixth sense where you're kind of have this little antenna that's trying to pick up on signals. And it's my job to see all these signals and connect them together to make a story and see the bigger picture of where we're headed. So that's why travel was so important. It still is important. It's a little more difficult, but you know, you want to see what the entire world's doing, because we would take all this information, we would create these trend presentations, and then turn around and travel again to present to every major retailer around the world. So I would say, like, I would present this information to like Levi's in San Francisco, and then I turn around and I go to Hong Kong and present to Levi's in Hong Kong the same information. And then we would also present to like mills and manufacturers to get them all on the same page. And why this is so important is that, you know, it can take a bit of time to create what you're wearing. And, you know, if you're looking at fast fashion, that happens too quickly. And I think a lot of us are, you know, kind of against it. But like back in the day when this was first created, you know, to make a t-shirt, it took 2 years to make a t-shirt. And so you needed that information ahead of time. But it's also like, I try and tell people who just have no concept. It's like, no concept of trend forecasting. Like, imagine going into your favorite retailer, like let's say Gap, or maybe it is Levi's, and just imagine that like a sales rack just exploded in the store, and there's no rhyme or reason to it, and it's confusing to the consumer because you don't know where to walk, you don't know where to go. I mean, some people love that you know, the hunt to try and find something, but that's not the case. Like, this is what I kind of try and say is trend forecasting helps everybody to create a story. So when you walk into the store, there's a reason why there's blue over there, or there's, you know, some kind of theme happening over on the left, and it's very organized. And whether you realize it or not as a consumer, you're being led around the store, you know, for a reason. And so it helps kind of organize all that information and makes it a much more pleasant shopping experience for the consumer. So we're trying to get everybody on the same page to all tell the same story. So therefore you see what you see in the store. And that's why, you know, you're like, oh, there's wide leg jeans in this store, and there's wide leg jeans in that store, and one over there. It's because everybody's kind of on the same page, because that way, whatever's kind of popular, everybody has it. So you can have your choices. It's not just one store only selling it. And I say, like, if you have that information wrong, it's major loss for your company. If you don't have the right product, you could lose millions of dollars. So it's getting everybody on the right page, so everybody is happy and everybody makes money and the world continues on.
Well, so you said something there, trend forecasting creates a story, and that made me wonder, is that how you see people wearing clothes? Are they trying to tell a story?
Absolutely, yes. Yes. I think I think you can tell people who are really into it and people who maybe don't care as much, and I'm not judging you either way, but you're telling a story with what you're wearing, absolutely. And whether it's, you know, you're trying to look even like professional and you're going in for a job interview, if they're still, I mean, even if they're virtual, you still want to look put together. And, you know, if you look sloppy, that tells a story. But I think it also just tells a story because I'm really into color and just how that makes you feel and what that does. And, you know, people don't always realize that color is like 85% of your purchasing power. That's what you look at first. And so I think what you're wearing often, like, you know, might tell me a bit about your personality. It's telling so many things, for sure.
That's interesting. So it makes me wonder, do you look at the way somebody's dressed before you meet them, make an assumption on this person? I guess just based on appearances, and then
I mean,
are you pretty accurate on that?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I think, like, for example, I met this woman last night at a small industry party, and she had on this beautiful pink and orange, like long jacket. And I was immediately drawn to it. And of course, her personality was very outgoing and it totally matched what she was wearing. And so that assumption that I was drawn to her and wanted to talk to her definitely added up. I mean, I also, like, I tend to wear a lot of neutral colors, and I don't think I'm a total introvert. I mean, I have my moments and I have my time for that. So I don't think it's always necessarily an accurate statement always, because sometimes people just, you know, they want to keep it simple. But I do think that often, yes, I will kind of see what someone's wearing, and often I'm correct about, you know, a little bit about who they are personality wise, or, you know, how they're feeling that day, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I was thinking too, it probably impacts the way you feel. So me, I love bright colors. I especially like to have like really bright shoes and socks, and I love like pinks and purples, and I just love those colors. And I feel I feel more powerful. Well, I mean,
More alive.
I like to stand out, right? So,
Yeah.
I'm pretty unassuming, invisible. I'm 6'3", bald with a giant mustache, so people don't notice me very much. So I really
Not at
need
all.
to
You
wear these.
blend in.
I really need these bright colors to make me stand out. I don't know. There's just something about it. I feel, I don't know. I feel more me. I feel more powerful when I wear bright colors. It almost sometimes feels like a suit of armor. Like, this is who I
Absolutely.
am, and I don't care. And
Yeah.
think what you
Well,
want, say what you want.
I totally agree. I mean, I think I look at the pandemic. I mean, again, I was in New York. I'm in New York, so it was maybe different for everybody. But here, we were very much inside for a while. And I mean, yes, I was wearing comfortable clothes, sweatpants, whatever, pajamas, working in my pajamas, and I think over time, I really think it took a toll on everybody.
Mm,
And I mean, I'll never forget putting my jeans back on. And then you're like, did I gain weight or were they always this tight? And I just don't remember that. But I will say, like, going back out into the world again, it's like I see so many people being really creative with what they're wearing. And I think there is that mindset of like it makes you feel alive and, like you said, more powerful. You can take on the world if you're dressed appropriately. And it is my dad has always said, and I think it's also just a famous line, but like when you look good, you feel good.
mhm.
And I think it's very true. Like you can change your attitude by what you're wearing. So it's very powerful.
I've had these philosophical conversations with my wife about she likes to have a certain aesthetic. She likes to dress a certain way. She says it's only for her, but I have this, my viewpoint is, if everybody else in the world was blind, would you still dress this way? The answer is
That's a,
probably not, because nobody would see it. So ultimately, I think you sort of are dressing for other people, but also yourself. And I think, like you said, it's more about how it makes you feel, right? And
yes.
ultimately, it's because other eyeballs will see it, and you will present in maybe a certain way. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing that you're dressing for other people, because obviously, if nobody could see, we would just, wear burlap sacks, and nobody would. No, you'd
No.
wear something much more comfortable than that. But
Probably. I mean, there's also, I mean, look at even just sneakers. I mean, those have blown up. It's a whole culture out there, like sneaker culture. And it's funny because I was never really into it because I didn't like how they looked on me, like in an outfit going to an office, like back in the day. And it's funny because I totally have embraced it now, and there is something about that comfort that is wonderful, and I totally get it. And now they're very fashionable, and they're doing really cool stuff with tennis shoes, obviously. And but yes, there is like there's that thing where I think everybody would just dress for comfort if they could. And so it's a really interesting question to be like, if everybody couldn't see you, what would you wear? And that is but it's interesting. Like I want to test it out now and see like how are people acting if they can't be seen versus with what they're wearing, because it does make you like I think about like I for the longest time I haven't really now with the pandemic, but I would always wear like a white t-shirt, a black blazer, and jeans. That was kind of like a uniform for me. But I always felt put together, and I would present a lot. And if I had the right shoe and the right jewelry or something, but that blazer made me feel powerful. And so with that whole if you can't be seen, I feel like if I still put that on though, I you could hear it in my voice. I'd feel more confident or something like that. So I don't know. It's an interesting experiment. I want to test out now.
well, I think something you said there too really strikes a chord with me. And you said uniform, right? Like it's your
Hmm.
uniform, and
Hmm.
not everybody has like a like an issued uniform, like a policeman or a fireman or something like that. And we all kind of put our uniforms on, and sometimes they're invisible, right? Like so,
Yeah.
my wife is a fitness instructor, and when she puts her leggings on and her tiny top that she wears and all that stuff, it's like that's her uniform. She's going into battle, and even if she's not dressed a specific way, she puts kind of this invisible uniform on where she's a
Mm.
little bit perkier and a little bit more outgoing and a little bit peppier. You know what I mean? So it's,
Yes, yes,
I guess one kind of probably feeds the other a little bit too.
definitely. And I think the uniform thing is interesting because even like if you look in at fashion, like Anna Wintour, Karl Lagerfeld, who's no longer alive, but these very important people in fashion, they all basically wear the same thing every day. And I find it interesting as a creative. I think sometimes it's like your job is to be creative and you're thinking about so many other things that it's like the last thing you need to think about is like how to put this like amazing outfit on. So there's something sometimes really powerful about that uniform as well, because it can make your life a little easier. And so sometimes I would be envious of people, like even Lish, when she was in restaurants, she had her uniform, and I would have to go to the office, and for my job in trend forecasting, it was all these fashionable people, and it was like some days you just like didn't want to have to think about it, you just wanted to like just put on the same thing. And so there is something wonderful about that as well. And you can't, depending on the uniform, you might totally stand out, or you might become invisible as well. But
yeah, well, I mean, I would think in trend forecasting too, you sort of alluded to this, there's a higher expectation upon you. It's like, as this person who works in fashion, you're supposed to be forward looking. I mean, you probably always have to be put together in a very specific way. And
yes. I mean, whenever I'm presenting, it was always, it still is. I act like it's in the past, but you feel like you have to be put together, or at least, or for me, that's why often I'm a trend forecaster, but I don't always follow the trends. Like I'll have like an updated shoe or an updated blazer or something, but I actually find myself going to the classics. And I think again, it kind of is because like that's my world, and it's so hard for me to then like translate that back onto me, and like how exactly am I going to look. And I've noticed a lot of trend forecasters aren't always dressed in the most trendy of ways, and I do think that's part of the reason, is because it's like they're just so, your brain is so over there with trends, and it's like, and we're working so far in advance that sometimes you forget like what's happening right now. Like sometimes people will be like, well, what's the trend right now? And you kind of have to like go back in your mind again and be like, what is happening right now? And look and see, what's going on. But yes, you definitely, if you're not put together, especially when you're presenting to clients, like it's a key thing to do for sure, to have some sense of what's going on. Absolutely.
There's a line that I think applies to fashion that RuPaul Charles said, and it's pretty famous. I think it's in a line, but it's we're all born naked and the rest is drag. And I kind of like the idea of that. Like, everything that you put on is your drag, right? It's the person you're trying to present, or this is who I am right now. Or
yes, absolutely. That's a great. I've got to use that quote. Put that in my back pocket. That's a good one.
Dude, RuPaul's got tons. Like
oh my God, yeah.
very, very quotable.
Yes.
They've definitely put a lot of time and effort into the creative output that they have. So something else that you were sort of talking about that really piqued my interest was, you said, while you're traveling around, you're looking at all these different kind of cultural trends and things like that you pick up on signals. And I like the idea of that. To me, that sort of alludes to maybe like an intuition that you sort of developed. So is that something that you feel like you naturally had, or is that like a muscle that you trained over time? Or
I think it's both. 100% it's a muscle that I don't think people know how to utilize. And I think intuition can help you in everything in your life. And it's really, it is training it over time, because it's truly listening to that little voice talking inside of you. And like, even as an example, like with color, I always tell people and some of my clients that like, if you see a color palette, or like even just a color combination, and for me, if I don't like it and I think it's ugly, that means I have to go after it, because it means it's something new that I haven't seen before, or it's a new way of using these colors that, like, because it's not familiar, therefore it's something to pay attention to, because it's something I'm not seeing. So what does that mean? And sometimes it doesn't always flesh out, but oftentimes it does. And that was something that I remember really kind of honing over time, is to leaning into those things that you have some kind of reaction to. And it can be a good or a bad reaction, but oftentimes the one that you kind of like pull back on, sometimes that means you need to dive in further. And I feel like that's even just translates into life, like whether you want to take this new job or not, or, you're dating a new person or something, or if you have these like little things that you're like not sure about, but you're still curious. Like, I'm not saying like it's a reaction that you're like, ugh, but like just one that you're kind of like pull back, but you're still kind of curious about, then that's like your intuition talking. And that means for me, you have to dive into that more. So it's absolutely a muscle that I've developed over time. But I also think I'm a pretty highly sensitive person. And I think I've just always naturally been that way. And so when you're sensitive, you do just pick up on so many things all the time, and it can be overwhelming. But I've learned to like use that as like a superpower and, use that in trend forecasting. And I think a lot of forecasters are highly sensitive people. And so, and we all have this really big intuition that's just constantly talking to us all the time.
So when you say sensitive, do you mean kind of in all facets of your life, like sensitive to emotional situations as well as?
Yeah, like even just, like walking down the street, especially like in New York, like like if someone's talking to me, I just have such a hard time really paying attention to them sometimes because I just see and feel all these things happening around me. And it's, obviously New York is New York, but even like if I'm back home in Wisconsin, where my parents live in 40 acres in the middle of nowhere, so it's super quiet, but yet I can still hear, I hear all of nature talking, and I really am just highly in tune to it all. And so that can be, it can be wonderful, it can be not so wonderful, depending on, the situation or how much you're trying to focus or that kind of thing. Or just even with emotion, I really can pick up on other people's emotions. And so, again, it can be good or it can be bad, depending on what you're doing, because you don't want to pick up on a lot of negative energy either, or negative emotions. But yeah, so it's that like that extra sense that's just, you're kind of constantly you're absorbing this information. And so, like if I land in a new country, I can very quickly feel like what's the attitude here? How alive or not alive is a place, and just pick up all these things.
Do you have the ability to throttle that a bit? Like when you want to, you can kind of pull that back, or is that just like a switch that's always on?
I mean, it's kind of always on, but I've learned to turn it off, if I need to. I mean, even just like visually, so when I'm out and about looking at everything, I'm also photographing tons of stuff. And so, like there was a time I was actually with Lish, and we made her stop, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was photographing a sewer lid, because it had some really interesting pattern on it. And so I'm constantly seeing the world in color and patterns and textures. And that can be like very overwhelming sometimes, because it's like I can't just see the things sometimes. Like I see like these shapes, or I see these patterns emerging. So that's something that I'm really into. That's another way that I've kind of honed over the years of forecasting, is like picking up on that stuff. So if like I'm in a new city and it's like all of a sudden I see this yellow thing, and then I see yellow on the sewer cap, and then I see yellow over there, you're kind of like, okay, yellow might be a theme here to like pick up on and see where that takes me. So just again, it's like connecting the dots, of all these crazy things.
Yeah, it sounds like Sherlock Holmes. You're picking up on all these imperceivable little tells, I guess, of a culture, of a city, of the way people are thinking or feeling in this area, and you kind of place together like this interesting picture. So
exactly,
the seeing of patterns and stuff like that, to where it just always catches your eye. I'm assuming, like as a little kid, you weren't doing that. That's something that probably came later when you started doing the trend forecasting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I always loved color. I always loved art and that kind of stuff. But yes, seeing these patterns, like visual patterns, emerge was something that didn't really happen until I started forecasting. And I was kind of, you're kind of thrown into it, because it is a job that like really isn't. I feel like today it's talked about a little bit more, and it's something that you can actually study at school. But like I certainly couldn't. I didn't know about it. And so I was just kind of thrown into it once I started the job. And like one of my first trips, they're like, you just have to photograph everything. And you're kind of like, okay, like what exactly does that mean? I knew I had to photograph what people were wearing on the street. Like I would stop people and, ask them to take a photograph if I liked what they were wearing. But then we call them like mood photographs. So it's like, you're like, even, you see this pink bag behind me, like maybe I'd zoom in on that a little bit, and there's something happening with the pink bag and the brown box. And you kind of zoom in and take a photo of that, and that might get paired then with, fashion of some kind, whether it's a runway or a person on the street. So it's like you're constantly looking at these things and making sense of what that translates into. Or it's like, maybe I call it color blocking. Like that's kind of, it's called color blocking because you have different colors happening there, and you could translate that into a pattern. And then the next thing you know, you have this interesting geometric color blocked pattern on your clothes. So it's you're trying to translate those things that you're finding out in the world into what you could wear. In my case, but you could use it in, like, I work with a creative agency that does branding, so they might use that for packaging, a pattern on packaging or something. So yeah, cool. it can get dizzying.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, so many things. Like, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So many things. So you were talking about working with various companies, and I think you alluded to earlier that you used to work for different corporations. You worked on teams. Do you miss being part of a team sometimes?
Sometimes, because I find it's, everybody sees things differently. And so it is kind of nice having that group come together. Because what we would do is we'd all travel around the world, different places. And you come together and you kind of have these like round robin discussions of like what you're seeing. And sometimes you might be like, oh, well, I was over here and they had something similar. Like maybe it's an art exhibit or something, or like there's a similar thing happening cross cultures, and so that you're just sharing that information. And so I've definitely developed a network of independent forecasters, and we all kind of talk with each other and relay information, or we have what we call trending sessions where we're just kind of like riffing and talking about articles we've been reading or places we've gone or whatever. So you find a way. I mean, today we're also connected via this, that it's easier to have a team again. But sure, I mean, sometimes I miss it for sure, because it's just power in numbers, and you have just all these different ideas coming together for sure.
So do you guys traditionally sort of work as what am I
teams
saying here? Like fairly collaboratively and nice? You guys share information, or I always kind of assumed that like fashion, like you guys like carefully guarded all of the information you had. I didn't realize there was a lot of cooperation amongst them.
There is a lot of guarding of information, and even like this job, it was so secretive for so long, and which is why I think no one still to this day totally knows or understands it. But we were at one point, like even before I was even alive, like they were the true gatekeepers of the information. And a lot of it is because you're working so far in advance, you can't really share it all because it's secret information for these brands and companies. Otherwise, it wouldn't really work out if everybody just knew the information right off the bat. How do you make things ahead of time and have everybody be on the same page? But I would say like within the industry, there's many different forecasting agencies in there. I would say like there's not so much of a sharing thing going on. But what's interesting is it's like every now and then we'll, whether it's at a trade show or like some kind of color meeting, like people will all come together, and it always has blown my mind that we all are talking about the same thing. So it's like somehow we are always correct, or always, just on that same page. Or it's like, if we're talking about a specific shade of blue, like maybe there's like two different versions of it, but it's a similar, let's say teal blue or something. So it's interesting that way. But I would say just think everything's changing with social media. There's a lot less secretive stuff happening, and I think more people are trying to just share information more. But that said, we still have to sign NDAs, and it's still very, very fairly secretive information.
I guess with social media now, it's easier to quote unquote travel to other parts of the world and see other cultures and kind of get a sense of what's going on there, huh?
It is. I mean, I'm the first advocate to say it will never replace in-person travel. I didn't realize at the time, but when I was at my agency, I didn't realize the amount of travel we did was really rare. Like for other trend agencies, a lot of them have like what's called stingers on the ground. So it's like an agency in London, for example, like I do some work now for some companies in England, and I will report back to them what's happening in New York, but they won't necessarily physically come here. So I mean, I can report, all this information, but I still, as the forecaster, if someone's reporting into me, I still will find new things if I actually go to that place. Like I just, you can tell me all this stuff, but like I still you can't replace that thing of physically being there. And that's when it's like you're walking around, you're like, oh, I know I shouldn't go down the alley, but I'm going to go down the alley. And like, that's where I find the treasure, And so I just think it is a wonderful tool to have, social media. And yes, I can find out about new designers or just interesting things happening that I don't necessarily have to be there for. And it's helpful for me to like look at and research. But that said, I will never, ever take the place of physical in-person travel.
Yeah. In my head, whenever I go to places, I truly enjoy traveling. I love seeing new things, meeting new people. Obviously, I love meeting new people. It's fun. I do this.
Here we are. Yeah.
Yeah. But for me, whenever I go to a new place, it definitely evokes feelings in me and emotions. Like I feel different. Like I feel the place, I feel the energy of whatever environment I'm in. And so I'm assuming you can't fake that by just looking at somebody's social media stuff and, printing out information or having swatches. I mean, you really have to be there, right?
You really do. And I think too with social media, you get this thing in a place where like everybody wants to go and photograph it. It's like the Instagrammable place or something. And so then it just gets like oversaturated, and like, yes, maybe it still is a cool thing that they're photographing, but like there's so much more to a place than this one thing to prove that you were there. And so sometimes I feel like, one thing will just get like so hyped or just oversaturated on social media, and you're like, but I want to know more about that country or more about the city or whatever. And so I think that can get lost sometimes. And so yeah, you're seeing a very curated view or perspective of a place via social media. So yeah, you can't get that same energy. You can't meet the local randomly and next thing you know, you're at a bar having drinks and talking about their place, I mean, it just doesn't happen that way if it's just this way. So absolutely. I'm like forever going to be a huge advocate for traveling.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm probably always going to be the person that wants to go and see the thing. A little travel is great. Too much, I'm finding, can be a little taxing.
Yeah. Well, there was a point where I just feel like I was just constantly in the air. And, I was going around the world like 3 times in a year. And it's like I would, be in South America in November and then Asia in February. And, just like it was glamorous at times and it was amazing. Like I was a true jet setter. But it also, it takes a toll. It takes a toll physically. It takes a toll. Like you just want to be at home. And then I got what I asked for, and then I was really at home for the past 2 years. And it's wonderful, but it's all in balance. Like everything in moderation, right? Even what you eat. So I think I hope like everybody's finding that balance of travel too, and trying to do more like meaningful travel. Like I was constantly like hopping around, or I'd go to like 4 or 5 different countries in 2 weeks, and you never really got to like really get the soul of a place. And so one of my things going forward is to try and just be there for a while. Like even we went to Mexico City this past November, and everybody kept telling us to do all these day trips. And I'd been to Mexico City like so many times for work, but I never actually vacationed there. And I was like, I just want to be here for a week. I don't want to do any day trips. I just want to be here. And that's what we did. And it just felt it was so rich with the experience, because you just got to slow down and take in a place. So if more people can try and do that and not have this like FOMO of like missing out on something while they're there, I think it can help everybody. So that's my new goal.
My best experiences with travel thus far have been, and what really set it off for me is I had the opportunity to go to Australia to a friend of mine's wedding, and they basically ensconced me with like his soon-to-be in-laws, and they just like took us in like we were just one of their own. And after about a week, they shipped us to the neighbors across the street that was their friends, and they just took us in. These complete strangers to them like took us in, and I don't know,
That's
just the
amazing.
experience of like being with the locals, like with the natives is
Yes.
something that I want to repeat on every trip if I possibly can. So for me too, this is also like I'm setting up this network of people in all these areas that I want to go to, or I love to go to. And
yes, I think that
makes
is
it so much
also
richer.
it really does. Like I couldn't agree with you more. Like if you can have some kind of local experience every time, that will forever be your highlight. Every time, it's like you can check all the boxes of all the things you're supposed to do, but it's not that. You're just like literally scratching the surface, and you're not really doing it in my mind properly. And I agree. But that is the one beauty of social media and this hyper connected world, is that you can attempt to make more friends. Like there's been definitely people I've met through Instagram that I've yet to meet, but we keep talking about that. Each of us are more than welcome in each other's homes at some point. So that is kind of cool, I think. So there's the good and the bad, I guess, but
Yeah,
local
absolutely.
experience all the way.
Yeah, because it is this ability for me to reach out and communicate with other people is one, expanded my worldview. Like I think differently every time I talk to somebody. Like you have surprised me on so many things in here. Like trend forecasting, I see it now as a scientific process. Like you're going out, you're researching, but it's also blending this emotional and this human piece that I hadn't really expected. You go and you feel your way through a city, a culture, and get a sense of what they're doing. Well, you take that information and you start applying the scientific process where you say, I see these things, and so my intuition tells me, and my past experience tells me X, Y, Z, and then you see how that pans out over time, like that. I love, I had never expected any of this, and it's so fascinating to me, because I've started feeling my way through the world just in recent years, and to hear you say that you take in a whole lot and it can be overwhelming, it's like, oh my gosh, yes, I like totally know what that's like, and I'm desperately hoping that you figured out a way to control it, because it's like sometimes when people are like talking to me, I now try and feel what they tell me. Like I want to interpret it, I guess through all of my experiences. I want to feel how they feel in the moment, to see, how that adds up. And if they keep telling me more and more negative things, there's a point where it's like, I can't take it anymore.
Exactly.
So yeah. I'm trying to learn that balance.
Trying to learn boundaries, perhaps. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Learning the boundaries. Yeah. You can only take in so much.
Yeah. This is all so fascinating to me. Like, and also, talking about the scientific process, I think you sort of alluded to it, if
yes.
there is something that happens in an environment, like a recession or like a pandemic, that will potentially inform how you're going to trend forecast. Does that sound right? So it's like you might actually immediately have some stuff in mind that like in the past we've seen these things happen, and so this is what I'm looking for. Is that kind of what happens for you sometimes?
Yes, absolutely. And as we all know, history sometimes, unfortunately, oftentimes repeats itself, whether good or bad. But and I think you can always look back on things. It's like even back with the 1920s. It's like they were coming out of all that, or they were. I have to go back on my timeline now, but there was that whole party scene happening, and then you have the Depression, and
right.
All these. Then you have like World War II, and then you look at like the liberation of the 60s, and there's always these like different decades that kind of are the
like pendulum swings, huh?
Yes, exactly. I was like, what is that called? Yes, that. And it's so sometimes it's now it's like rocket science. It's just you're just paying attention and looking past to look forward. And my job though is to try and make it better. Like I want to try and live in a world that like I want to live in, and I think most people want to live in. And so you have to be careful with that, or even just with sustainability. There was a point in time where I was telling brands, gosh, like 100 colors in a year. And so environmentally, like that's not really good to be producing all these dye stuffs that you're not always fully using. And so trying to, think about the environmental impact of fashion, especially fast fashion, and, trying to change our ways. So like now I kind of just come up with a core, very small core group of colors, and try and get brands to just keep reusing that and only introduce one or two a season. So you don't see like a million things happening, and just trying to like reduce the impact that fashion has on the environment that way. So there's, little things like that I try and change. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to make the world a better place. And so you're trying to get everybody on track with that and hope that can happen.
Wow. That is a lot to keep in your head.
It is. It's exhausting sometimes.
A lot of spinning plates.
Yeah. I was talking to a forecaster the other day, and we were having this moment where we're like, our brains are just on overdrive and we just want to make something with our hands, so it's like very important sometimes to just take the break and just, paint, read, draw, like, I don't know, just do something. Or that's why I go for so many walks, which again, I still am taking in information, but like it also helps to just like see things in the physical versus the computer is such a huge tool now. So yeah, but it can be exhausting. So you have to take your breaks, or just learn to live with the information as well. Sometimes.
Is it really easy for you to overwork yourself, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially just with mentally, because you're connecting all this information all the time, and we'd be having a conversation, and maybe you mentioned some article, and then it's like, oh, but that could go with that trend that I'm working on. So put that in your back pocket. Look that up later. You're constantly kind of being like, oh, that could go with this thing that I'm working on. Because usually I'm working on like three trends in a season. So, which is like usually twice a year. So, you're kind of constantly picking up that information and being like, that could go with that,
Well, I know too, like, so I'm traditionally in IT, like, like computer-y stuff. And I've noticed, like, as we've moved remote, it's like, this is where I live, work, and play, like this room, right? So it's like, sometimes it's hard for me to remember to stop working, right? Because this is the place where I do all these things. And so and I've noticed with a lot of the other professionals that I work with or I talk to that, yeah, that like overworking mentality can definitely be really easy for them now.
Yeah.
And I assume it's probably the same for you, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's easy to just keep going. And so I almost have to set an alarm sometimes to just be like, okay, that's your hard stop. Like you just have to stop. And
that's a terrific idea. Like actually setting an alarm. I've transitioned really well into having a work-life balance, especially with this new occupation I have. It's much easier for me now than it used to be, but a lot of people, I guess, are having troubles with that.
I think so. I mean, I think the remote thing, I mean, I was working remote before the pandemic hit, so it wasn't that big of a transition for me. But just seeing friends and other people, like I think there's a real beauty to it. Like I think about the amount of time I would save just commuting on trains. I'd have 2 hours a day commuting. Like one of my bosses had like 4 hours a day commuting.
Wow.
So you think about, wow, how did I used to get all that stuff done, before this all happened? But I think it's also hard because you need to have those boundaries within your home, and that you can just attempt to stop working at some point and not check your email and do all that. So hopefully people can learn that. I hope there's a big lesson coming out of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's rewind the tape just a little bit and tell me about the angelic girl with the tap shoes on. Tell me about little Abby. What does little Abby look like? I
mean, I was still am, but a big dreamer. And because I grew up, literally in the middle of Wisconsin on 40 acres, I lived on a dead end road. And I always kind of say, I realize now that to me, that dead end road was like my runway to kind of propel me to take off and fly and see where it would take me.
It's a beautiful thought.
And thank you. Yeah, it's a magic for me. It's a very magical place. My parents still live there. They built their house, like they're kind of old hippies, and I love the whole world they created. But that said, because of that, they highly encouraged myself and my brother to dream big. And so because of that, I think it's funny because I can be, at the time I was kind of a very shy girl growing up, but yet I had these big, ambitious ideas, but it was like terrifying to constantly do that. But somehow like I was definitely born with like this risk taker skill set to just still do it, even though it scared the crap out of me. So I think like as much as I was shy and sort of angelic, like gentle, I definitely was raised to go big and raised to, if you're curious about something, like go see what that's about. Why are you curious about it? Like learn more about it. And so I think, for me dancing, like I taught tap, but I did tap forever. I thought I was going to be a professional tap dancer. And then just realized that wasn't just, it's not real easy to do. You can do it. And the people who do it are amazing. But I loved this. I loved the performance part. I loved being on stage. But I liked that I couldn't really see the audience. So it was sort of this like shy yet, extrovert thing happening. And to this day, I feel sort of the same way, like, cause I present all the time. And especially again, before the pandemic, I was, on stages and, sometimes large, 500 people audiences or something at trade shows or whatever. And I've always enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed being up there. Again, not always being able to see the audience. I don't mind that. I don't like it when I can see the audience, but so I don't know. It's like the funny balance in me is it can be very shy yet very extroverted in just two extremely different ways.
Well, you must really enjoy the way we present on Zoom nowadays, because I'm presenting to a bunch of black squares.
Oh, interesting. Yes.
Nobody ever has their camera on.
Oh, really? See, everybody always has their camera on for me, and I actually don't like that. I don't like it at all. Like, can you just turn them all off? That'd be great. So if that happened, then I wouldn't mind it. And if it's just one-on-one like this, I'm fine.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to ask you, like, could that young Abby ever dream of who you've become today? But it sounds like you absolutely could have.
In a way, yeah. I mean, I guess I didn't know this job existed, and I knew I kind of wanted to do something in fashion. Like I would always get these bags of clothes from my aunt because she worked at a she owned a vintage clothing store. And so things that, wouldn't sell, she would give to me. And I was always playing dress up. I was always doing fashion shows. My brother and I he would be my DJ. And because at the time he was obsessed with Van Halen, that's all that would play at the fashion show. But we'd have Van Halen or AC/DC. And I would have, a friend over and we'd perform this fashion show for, our neighbors and my parents. And so I think I knew I always wanted to work in fashion. I just didn't know what that looked like. I had never been to New York. We traveled a lot as a family. We'd always do like road trips and things. And we did go to London once, but we never went to New York. And there was always kind of this joke that I would run away to Broadway and become like a tap dancer, but and that idea like was amazing, but scared the shit out of me. And it wasn't until I met my wife, Lish, that we came here for like a hot second to see about a job. And then we just kind of blindly moved here. Like she had been here more than I had. And I just kind of hope and a prayer moved here, without an apartment, without a job, and just fortunately fell into the path that I'm on. But I mean, I had like an internship in Paris where I kind of learned about trend forecasting in college, and a job at Wisconsin at Kohler, the place that does sinks and bathtubs and toilets.
Right, yeah.
I learned about forecasting there, still not understanding that it was a job. Like this whole time I never understood it was a job. But then I, through a connection, I ended up getting a job as a forecaster at the oldest agency in New York, or in the U.S. And they hold all the color standards for like the U.S. Army, I believe, with like uniforms and maybe the flags. And they go back to like 1910, I believe. And so I learned that was only color forecasting, but I kind of got to learn about color forecasting that way. And we had different clients, like Toyota was a client, car companies, they go even further out than fashion. Same thing with activewear. But we had like a stationery company and all different types of clients at that one. And that's where I started kind of understanding it a little bit more. But yeah, it's a very, like I said, I didn't know. I didn't understand it for the longest time. I feel like you kind of get thrown into it and you're just, like the first couple of years, you're like, I don't exactly know what I'm doing, but it's interesting and fun. So yeah, I never looked up to anybody doing this job. You know what I mean? Like there was no understanding of like, oh, I want to do that someday.
You just found yourself in there doing it.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You said that you had never really been to New York, and then you pretty much just up and moved there. And that sounds a little incongruous with the girl at first. I'm guessing you kind of came out of your shell a little bit, but
yeah.
Do you feel like Lish was kind of the thing that made it safe for you to do some of this stuff? Like to be bold and to be crazy?
For sure. I think it was like, I knew I always wanted to come to New York. I just didn't, because she went to school at, in Hyde Park and CIA, and like she would come down to New York during her time in college. And so like she, knew it like a touch more, and she had this passion for it. So it absolutely helped propel me to be like, all right, let's do this. It is one of those things, like if I hadn't met her, like I'd be curious where I'd be, because I feel like for me the next step would have been maybe Chicago, because that was the next big city that was close to where I lived. I mean, I tried going out to school in LA. I tried going to it's called FITM. It's a fashion school. And I, failed miserably at being out there by myself. Like I didn't have a car. I didn't know what I was doing. I was, 18. I tried going to school in Wisconsin for a year at a state college, and I was just like not happy. And so, I went out there. I lasted like 3 months. It was a disaster. But I always say, like, because that all happened, I came back to Wisconsin because I was still accepted into Milwaukee, a state school, and I didn't have to reapply and all this stuff. And so because I came back, like I was able to meet Lish, and then had that not happened, had I succeeded out in LA, like I don't know, my life would be totally different. So it is those like funny things that happen that lead to things. And so yeah, we met. I mean, and I taught her tap. That's how we met. It goes back to tap dance.
Yeah, because I remember she was saying that she really enjoyed tap. It still loves tap, or not tap, but dance.
Dance, yeah, she loves ballet more, I would say, but it's just funny. Like I needed money in college, and teaching dance was more than working at the Gap, which is I worked at the Gap a little too, but it paid better, and so it was my passion. Like I just loved tap dance, and so I had like an adult class that I took that I taught, and Lish was one of them, and that's where we met, and so the rest is history from there. But then we just both knew we didn't want to be in Wisconsin, and I knew I wanted to work in fashion, and it was just like, you got to go to New York. Like, that's where I have to go. And yeah.
Right. So we're getting somewhat close to your cutoff. So let's slap cut to some of the future stuff, because you've done some really cool stuff that I wanted to talk about. So one is the Taste Curators, but I want to say that one for last. You are also a founding member of the Collab, and I was just curious, what is that, and what does that mean to you?
The Collab is this amazing community of people who, a lot of them work in fashion, but it's luxury fashion, beauty. It was created like in the very beginning of the pandemic, and I think so many people in fashion were losing their jobs. And the woman that started it, Christy Hurt, she worked for LVMH, like Louis Vuitton, and but she's a recruiter, and just had a bunch of contacts and realized that everybody was just kind of like flailing, and no one knew what to do. And so I found them, I guess it was through Instagram, and it's just an amazing network of people, and everybody's trying to help each other out. And we're, doing events, and actually Lish and I are doing an event tomorrow with them where we're making a custom cocktail for a place that deals with sustainability in fashion. And so, yeah, it's just an amazing place to kind of spread the word about who you are, and then also find like-minded people in the fashion world. And it's just been incredible. I've done a podcast with them, and I've been in their newsletter, and they have a book that came out. And so I was in that, and it's a wonderful place, a wonderful place to have community, which is oftentimes rare in fashion. Fashion can be very cutthroat and just not real friendly. And so it's been a wonderful place to be. So people should check it out if they're interested.
Yeah, that's awesome. So also, I don't know, how prevalent is it to have, say, mentors and mentorship in the fashion industry? Is that a common thing? Or
it can be. I was fortunate to have two different people. I think it can be difficult, but also I think it's so important. I think if you can ever have a mentor in life in anything, it's a beautiful thing. And I had one, and she's unfortunately no longer alive, but she was the owner of the Color Association, which is the first place I had worked at in New York. And she just, really taught me a lot about color psychology and just color in general, and, the meaning of it. She also taught me to sit down and have a proper lunch and not work at your desk and eat. And I just will never forget. She would always have this fine china that she had at the office, and she'd bring it out. And even if it was just a turkey sandwich or something, she'd put it on the china, she'd read the New York Times, and she would have her lunch. And that still resonates with me, to just slow down and kind of be present in the moment. So yeah, I think having a mentor is extremely important if you can be lucky enough to find one. And sometimes they're right under your nose, you don't even realize it.
What do they say sometimes? Was it when the student's ready, the master appears, sort of thing?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I did it once and I just in my head, I was wondering if the collab space was maybe a place where, you can make those kind of connections.
Yeah, there's a whole section that we run on Slack, and there's a section that's a mentorship channel, and you can definitely find one or be one to somebody.
That's so awesome. So something else I noticed, because I was digging around, is there was an article that you were part of with the collab space, and it was about being out in countries that maybe weren't so safe to be that way in. And I thought that was a pretty powerful piece, and written in such a way that it intrigued me, because I had never thought about that. The idea of navigating all of those delicate situations, I guess. And
yeah, being a lesbian in fashion, first of all, is not, I would say it's not the stereotype people think of when they think of fashion. They either think of a gay guy or a straight woman. Things are changing now for sure. At the time, I felt like the lone lesbian in fashion, and then having to travel.
I'm the fashion lesbian.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't wear flannel, and it was an interesting thing to navigate, and especially traveling. It was already difficult to travel by yourself as a lone female, and then let alone being gay. There were some countries it's totally illegal to be gay, so I definitely would not share that information. I have a wedding ring on, and they would often just assume I was married to a guy, and so they asked me what my husband did, and sometimes depending on the country I was in, I would just go with it. And And oftentimes I would have some of the countries we would have, there was different offices in some of the different countries that I went to. So there were colleagues there, and sometimes, they all eventually knew, and it felt like a safe space, but always something I had to navigate for sure. And even, like I said, just even being a single female traveling alone, like there's definitely, like there was a scam that I ironically just read about. I was in Turkey, and that afternoon, like I saw it happening to me, and like I knew, because I was very aware of what was going down, but like it's a scary moment where you're like, I gotta get out of here. Like I don't want them to know that I'm alone. And there's been some wild things happen. So you just again, that's kind of where the sixth sense and paying attention helps out, because you can pick up on a weird situation very quickly when you're in tune to all that.
Bravery above all else, it sounds like.
Yeah,
out there doing stuff.
Trying, and also just trying to educate people too. Like sometimes, people just wouldn't, they'd be like, oh, you're gay, and I'd be like, yes, and like I would never guess that. And it's like, well, we don't all look the same. It's just like everybody, there's not, as much as we have these stereotypes, it doesn't always, follow that way. And so
they don't issue us a card that we.
But then oftentimes again, the whole empathy thing, 9 times out of 10. They would be like, oh, well, I have a family member, or I have so-and-so that I'm trying to, we don't know, or we do know, or this whole conversation would happen, and it would become a very safe space. And so there was that like beauty occurring as well during these travels, and it was nice to kind of have the educational part of it, and just
part of it is that unwritten social contract, right? Where if I give you something, like something private of me, then you reciprocate. And so many people subscribe to that.
Yes, I think almost everybody does, and it's, especially if you can do it over a meal. Like, I don't know, I've never had a bad thing happen over, breaking bread. So, over fondue. So.
Excellent. Well, we are almost out of time. So let's talk about the Taste Curators. Tell me about that.
Yes. Well, Blish and I, my wife and I, just started it in 2020 in the pandemic. And it's a brand that we're building that merges the connections of food, fashion, and design. We realized both of our industries are very, very similar, from like literal things to, we have food labels, and we also have fashion labels on clothes and on products. We have, like even just, or things that like, to me, salt is very similar to thread. They're kind of the basis line of creating both things, the rest, or even like the recipe or the clothing patterns to like sew the garment, to make the recipe, make the dish.
Oh my gosh, I love this.
There's all these parallels. And so, and we've talked about even the word palette, like there's like your flavor palette that's spelled differently than the color palette, but they kind of both mimic similar things. Like what's happening in the flavor palette, there's like a whole range of things happening, and same thing with the color palette. So we're exploring, food and color, food and design, food and fashion, and we're doing different collaborations. We have a newsletter you can subscribe to that you get once a month. We're coming out with a cookbook series. So all kinds of fun stuff occurring with that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that makes me think of so many parallels like that had never occurred to me. Because we were talking about earlier about, when you wear a certain set of clothing, you feel a certain way. And I guess the same is true, like when you see your favorite foods or you smell them, right? That evokes those emotions and those feelings.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And we could have a whole podcast just on the parallels of those two things. Because it's once you like dive deep, it really, you're like, whoa, your mind starts to get blown, and how similar they all are.
I dig it. I love it. And you guys have an Instagram account that you pair pictures of like food with fashion and how they kind of meld together. And I love that series. Like every time you post one of those up, I spend way too much time just looking at them and thinking about it. And
but good. I'm glad. That means it's you're getting a reaction to it. I like it.
You're definitely making me less productive during the day.
Well, good. That's part of the goal too.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I love what you guys are doing with that, and I can't wait to see that thing just rocket ship off the surface of the earth, or maybe take flight from that runway in your
yes,
in your old home.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. We just did a private dinner party, and we're doing some fun things. So, so follow us, join us on our newsletter, all those good things.
Well, that transitions right here. If you want people out on the internet to interact with you in some way, or follow you on something, or do something, how would you have them do that?
I mean, Instagram is probably the best. My personal account is Abbey L Cook, ABBEYLCOOK. And then the Taste Curators is it's _taste_curators, CURATORS.
Excellent. Well, cool, man. Abby, we are unfortunately at time, right? Because I know you've got a pretty firm stop here. And so I thank you so much for your time, your energy. Like, you are so awesome. I learned so much. I have so many notes in here. I even have things I need to go look up, like what is fast fashion and stuff. Like, there's so many, I don't know. There's just so many good, really bits and pieces in there. And this is what I love. I absolutely love this because you expanded my mind, like making me think about things in ways I had never contemplated before. And I guess kind of akin to you talking about two colors that don't necessarily pair in your mind, but you do more research on it. It's like whenever these sort of things happen, it's like, man, I didn't realize these pieces could fit together, but it is so fascinating when they do. So thank you so much for your the gift of your time. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you. I had a blast talking about everything. So the feeling's mutual.
All right, well, let me hit stop on all this.